Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about a lawsuit brought by some 20 attorneys general of various states and the DC AG against the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, and others based on Bondi's declaration of policy that funds provided to various states under the Victims of Crime Act, the VOCA, are going to be contingent on states agreeing essentially to play ball with the Fed's immigration policy and not to serve as sanctuary jurisdictions. That's a complicated, amorphous term, but basically not to resist in any way, even lawfully, right? If they were resisting unlawfully, you wouldn't need this new provision, but not to resist, essentially to sign on the dotted line, kind of as they were trying to force Mayor Adams to do in New York, to abandon their state's support of or legal resistance to the aggressive anti-immigration policies of the feds, or else lose the grants that they have received year in, year out for 30, 40 years under the VOCA. Now, just a quick summary of the VOCA. It's been a huge success. It starts in the Reagan era with a general call to do better for victims who really were often kind of just left to the side and completely ignored in the overall DOJ law enforcement process. I was there as the VOCA came online, and the Department of Justice really does a lot now. It's the Office of Victims of Crime, but all kinds of services. There are funds that they use and give grants to the states that for shelters, for legal resources, for all kinds of sort of services for people who've been, really victimized and that had been set to the side before. It's a long list. It's a list that nobody could really quibble with. It's just, what the law enforcement system of the United States has, in a more progressive way, come to see, really has to be done. So it's a big operation within the Department of Justice. There's the whole, as I say, Office of Victims of Crimes, and it has a long list and an expanding list of all the sorts of things it does to help victims out. And it's been amended in bipartisan fashion by Congress over the years to allow more flexibility to state and local victims assistance programs. So it's been a real success story in how it dovetails with programs that the states have enacted but have been underfunded. And, the government deposits a certain fees recovered from people convicted of offenses. So it's not even a big burden on the federal, taxpayers and the like, but just all kinds of supports for under formula grants that the states can use in the way that they want to. And we're talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars to crime victims for all kinds of costs resulting from crime: medical care, lost wages, mental health counseling. That's a big one. Funeral expenses, kind of everything that state and localities decide to use. Okay, now enter Pam Bondi to say, you can't get these. You've been getting them in block grants for years. You can't get them unless you play ball with our draconian policies on immigration stuff, and we're just going to deny you that money. Now, there's going to be a little question in the lawsuit. What they've said, the DOJ is, she's got Bondi's issued a directive, and she's instructed the Office of Victims of Crime to enforce this restriction. and argue the states, the 20 states plus DC. If this happens, we have irreparable injury. These kinds of programs, if you pull the plug on it, the immediate damage is really great and you can't kind of undo it after. So see if the department comes in and says, well, it hasn't happened soon enough, we'll wait to see, because it's certainly, this goes into kind of complicated issues of what the law calls ripeness, but it's certainly been laid out and the orders have been given and they're ready to pull the plug. Okay. Now, in terms of doing it, there's several arguments that the Democratic AGs make. First, the familiar one: who the hell do you think you are? Congress passes the Victim of Crime Act. Congress adds to it. Congress expands. You can't put conditions on it that Congress hasn't done. You are absolutely weeding in Congress's garden, and that's illegit. And so it's a violation of separation of powers. Moreover, Administrative Procedure Act, I think we're getting sort of familiar with that. It is arbitrary and capricious. You come in out of nowhere and just all of a sudden, this really is an integral structural part of law enforcement now in the United States. And it's a good thing that it is. It's a whole extra dimension that had been ignored in many cases, tragic ways. Now it's a robust kind of partnership between the feds and the states, and to help victims of crime. And it's arbitrary and capricious for you to pull the plug. And then finally, we'll see if the department tries to rely on this. There are certain things that the department can't do just as a direct command, but can do under the spending clause. It can say, it's a really good example. Why is there a federal speed limit of, I think it's 65 at the, maybe 75 in some places? How do the feds enforce that? Isn't that a local issue? It is. But the feds have said there are highway funds that we're going to make available. If you take them, here's a condition. There is a string attached. You've got to have this non-maximum. You can't go far higher than this in your speed limit. And there's a certain congruity there, right, between highway funds and speed limits. States would be free to say, well, okay, we don't want the money. We'd rather be able to go 100 miles an hour, but they don't. So that's a sort of spending clause. We have this money, we're going to give it out, and if you want to take it, there are certain conditions. But there are limitations to this spending clause possibility. One is you can't basically use it to coerce. You can't make them an offer they can't refuse as it is, and have it be such a huge kind of money or source of funds from the federal government that they're stuck. That's one. But then two, and what's really going to apply here and what the Democratic AGs are saying, you can't do it unless there's some relationship. You can't use a federal funding limitation for highways to say every state has to say not permit certain books in the schools, whatever. There must be some kind of rational relation so the feds aren't just arbitrarily taking some money that's given and imposing a crazy, unrelated policy objective. So that's the argument here. This is for victims of crime. It's unrelated to our sovereign ability to be able to cooperate or not cooperate on certain federal immigration policies. That's our entitlement. And you can't force us to knuckle under by saying otherwise you're going to take away funds that really have nothing to do with it. It's just these big, important funds for victims of crime in general. So that's the argument. Okay, it's just been brought. The DOJ is going to come in. Maybe they'll talk ripeness. Maybe they'll talk what I just said, a legitimate spending clause authority. But it's a big theme going on now. Bondi is doing everything she can to try to push people around to force them. They're sending out letters saying, if you do this, we're going to potentially arrest officials in states that aren't completely cooperating with us, essentially blurring the line or just not seeing the line between obstructing national efforts, getting in the way of, say, ICE officers on the one hand, and not promoting and not going along and not making their lives easier, which they are not, as a general matter, required to do. That's a basic Federalist principle. But Bondi's trying to erase that principle and exert leverage anywhere she can. And this holding hostage the Victims of Crime Act funds is the latest effort. So big lawsuit now in Rhode Island. It was brought, and we'll see what the DOJ says in response. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.